So anyway, what a great term. It's great to catch up with you. Thank you for
You
taking time out.
too. You too.
So where are you located?
I'm in New York City.
Okay, you're in New York. Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I'm in the middle of America here in Kansas City. So,
Behold. That's
um,
fabulous. That's like it's a birthplace of jazz.
and it's actually doing really well. Cats are coming here. People are staying. Bobby Watson had a long tenure of kind of getting these proteges up and going, and it's fun. There's a good feeling here. All of the musicians love supporting each other. There's just this. It's not like a foot race, a sprint to the finish. It's like
Right.
we're all gonna kind of just hang out and pick everybody up and just have a good time, have a drink when we're done. We'll laugh about it, that kind of a thing. So
That's
it's
great.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So it's great to catch up with you about the new material. And before we get into motherhood, I want to know first and foremost, about 4 years ago, we were really in the thick of like wrapping our head around a new pandemic.
Yup.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
So now that we're out of it, live shows are happening. You have a new
hmm
album. How did you survive it, and how good does it feel to be on the other side of it?
Well, it was an interesting thing. I mean, and it relates to the album too, because the album I actually wrote the album in November of 2019, and
Yeah.
we premiered the music in January of 2020, thinking we were going to record it that spring. You know, we
Yeah.
all laugh about that now, but the pandemic was it was a mixed bag. I mean, obviously. It was horrible in all the ways that it was horrible to be getting terrible news and all the political climate, but my son was having a terrible time in school, and I don't know how it was out where you were, but the schools were just closed.
Yeah.
And they were closed for months, like months, and were offering very, very little support. And after I would say maybe about a month of seeing what the school was offering, I was like, we can't do this. And I pulled him out of public school and homeschooled him for 2 years.
Wow.
And the funny thing about all that is that, you think, "Oh my gosh, what an inconvenience," but it ended up being the greatest 2 years of my life with him.
Yeah.
And, it's like you find your blessings in difficult situations, and I tell you, I wouldn't give those 2 years back for $1,000,000, all in all, like, it was hard. It was hard the way that it was hard for everybody. It was a struggle, but, like, I got 2 cool years, like, hanging out with my kid and teaching him every subject and going to the park every day, and, I will always look back at that as one of the happiest times in my life. So,
I hear it
you
all the
know
time. I
yeah.
literally hear that all the time. And for me personally, I had to really decide what I wanted to do during that time. And I
Mhm.
did more interviews with jazz musicians than I ever did. And I would do them on speaker. And I have my son's 19 now, Miles, for named after obvious reasons,
Of course.
right? And he and so this was 4 years ago. So he was, kind of in the middle of teenhood. And my stepdaughter, who's kind of on the flip side, he's on the autism spectrum. She's like going on 13 going on 30.
Right.
Okay. So, but they would listen to the interviews and people all over the world, and the voice and the timbre of all of the musicians was overwhelmingly strong and positive, which was such a great place to be in. But it was so good to capture the essence of what was going on, because there was like a guy in Spain that was like, excuse me, hold on a second, there's people out on the balcony hitting pots and pans. I apologize. I was like, don't apologize, shove that phone out there right now, I want to hear it
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
you
yeah.
know
And it was a reckoning for a lot of us too. Like, I started a business at the same time I was homeschooling. I'd always been doing these online courses, and I had this vision of turning them into a membership. And, I would never turn gigs down, because you don't turn gigs down. But when there are no gigs, it was like, aha, now I have my chance to do this thing I've been wanting to do.
yeah.
And so, for a whole year, I was working on this project and got it launched. And now it's like a pretty lucrative, happening little business I have.
Yeah.
So, again, I would never have stepped away from doing gigs for that, but there weren't any. So I figured, why not, like, do
Yeah.
my thing? So, it was a wild time.
So you obviously, because of the pandemic, had to put off motherhood.
Yes.
So
Yes, I always
But
joke that my actual motherhood made it impossible for me to finish motherhood.
that's what I was getting ready to think. It was the weird, ironic twist, right? So talk to me about how you artistically put. I guess my thought on this is that you went into it pre-pandemic and then made it pandemic, and now it's coming out post-pandemic. You've had this whole like timeline here. How does
Yeah.
all of it feel to see it actually physically out?
It's like it's amazing, but I mean this project predates 2019. Like I wrote the first song from this record when I was pregnant. Like I wrote the lyrics to the first song called The Endless Wait. I wrote the lyrics for an existing song. So it was a song by an instrumental artist and I was planning to put it out on my 2013 album right about now, but they wouldn't give us the publishing rights. And
Oh,
so like this project has been going on for, I mean, my kid is 12 now. This is like more than 12 years that I've been working on this. Yeah. And so, it was little songs, like song ideas, like sung into my phone and in my voice memos. It was journals with lyrics. It was lyrics written on the back of things. And so 2019, when I was invited, I went to the Banff Center for Fine Arts for
yeah.
an artist residency. I was like, I had 9 days in a room with a piano and I had to get it done. And I sat down and I took all the paper fragments out and I turned it all into this project. And when the pandemic hit, I just pressed the pause button on it.
Yeah.
Just pause. And it was last year, it was around this time last year that I started to say to myself, okay, my business is stable, my kid is back in school, public school, everything's fine, everything's calm. I had a little extra money in the bank and I was like, you know what? If I don't do this year, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
And so I opened the project up. I spent the whole summer rewriting lyrics, rewriting the song, reorganizing things. And then I sat down and wrote the last two songs.
So now
So
that you're, no, go ahead. I'm
oh,
sorry.
go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say that. So now officially your motherhood is out of the bag. I
Yeah.
want to know, what do you want the listener to get from this project?
This project is really about transparency.
Yeah.
It's about what is true, not just for me, but for so many women and mothers
Yeah.
and fathers. Like it's a truth that is a universal truth, particularly for people who are in the United States or in Canada or in places that don't have the same kind of safety net, or they don't have the same support and respect for mothers. Like that's what I want it to be about. I share about a lot of very universal topics, like the invisible labor. Like pandemic times brought out the fact that women left the workforce in droves. And why did they leave the workforce? Because somebody had to be home with the kids.
Yeah.
And that's thousands of dollars that people didn't make. That's retirement income they don't have. The album also addresses like these unrealistic expectations that we put on moms, that we're supposed to be able to do all of this, but the minute something goes wrong, we get blamed for it. Constant finger pointing and everybody telling us we're wrong all the time. You can't go on a TikTok or a Instagram or on the news and they're like, oh God, they don't let their kids play outside anymore. And then you send your kid to the park. How could you let your kid go to the park?
Uh-huh.
It's dangerous. It's like
Uh-huh.
everything you do is wrong.
Yeah.
So it's really like a story of solidarity, and it's like a message of like strength and a
Yeah.
message of hope and a message of understanding of like this is real what you are experiencing, and let's acknowledge it and acknowledge our strength. So,
Yeah.
hopefully people will get that.
Oh, I think that I have no doubt they will. I've no doubt. So let's go to the beginning of your musical journey. Take me back to where you were born and raised and how these seeds of not only music, but more specifically jazz grew into who you are.
Yeah, so I took what I call middle class piano lessons from the time I was 4. Both of my parents had been musical and, they signed me and my brother up for piano lessons when we were kids. And, I was okay at it. I was never super dedicated, but my parents made me practice every day. But when I was 15, we had this cool new music teacher at our school, at my high school, and he played me Oscar Peterson, who you can see if you're
Oh
in the
yeah.
video.
Yeah.
And as soon as I heard him play, it was C Jam Blues. It
Hmm.
was, that amazing iconic recording. And I went, it's this. This is the thing. Because it had organization to it. It was so beautiful, but it felt so free to me. It just felt so free. And so from that moment on, I went home and I announced to my father, I'm going to be a jazz musician. I'm from Sarnia, Ontario. It's a very small city. It's 73,000 people live there, and like, what do we know about jazz? Like, it's not like I'm
Yeah.
in Kansas City or someplace that has a
Right.
history of that. It's like I'm in Sarnia,
Yeah.
and that was it for me. I completely dedicated my life to it. I started a jazz band. We had our high school jazz band, but I started my own combo, and we started recording 2 mornings a week at 7 a.m. before school, and like we were really serious. And I went to university in Toronto, to York University, where Oscar Peterson was actually the chancellor. So I
Oh,
got to
cool.
know him a little
Wow.
bit, which was
Wow.
super cool. I sat on a
Yeah.
piano bench and played with him one time,
Wow.
which was just, was amazing. He came to our concerts. Like it was just to know he was around. So, that was really it for me. Like it was like, yep, I'm ready for this. This is my thing. And that's how it started.
So you're in New York now, and obviously, no matter where you've lived on this planet, New York is the mecca of jazz. What was the venue that you always dreamed about playing at and you finally did, and you're like, wow, I can't believe it?
Oh, I mean, there's a ton of those. Like I've played at the Kennedy Center a few times. Like I sang at Carnegie Hall, not in a jazz context, but I um I sang at Avery Fisher Hall. We did the Mahler Symphony for 1,000. I've done so many cool things with music, and all the time I'm like, wow, this is really wild. But the one at Avery Fisher Hall at Lincoln Center was a pretty big deal. I called my father in tears after the first concert and said, "Thank you for making me practice the piano every day." But it's like these are some of the cool things that you get to do, like when you're doing your music thing. Like there's just cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, you're in a position now, you've been around, that you've played at a lot of venues, you played with a lot of veterans. What do you take from all of those experiences of being around legends and luminaries, like even with OP? And what do you try to teach the younger generations that you gig with or that you're around?
Well, I think, there's goods and bads with everything, like you can idolize somebody as a musician, but then you meet them and their personality is terrible. So that was quite eye-opening. Like especially early on where I was like, ooh, where I met some people who were amazing musicians and thought, I probably would have been better just listening to
Yeah,
to their
right.
records. Especially as a young woman in this industry, I tell you, it is
Yeah,
like it's a scene. But
yeah.
for the people that I've met, to see musically what people commit themselves to, and the seeking, it's like the seeking for everybody, like that they're looking for a thing, or they're like really on a granular level committing to a certain sound or to a certain process. I think that for me has been really interesting and inspiring to see people who are like at a very granular level doing one thing, or people who are their thing is doing a lot of things. And I think, um, you know, artistically, that's been something that's really kept me going, to see all the different ways that people can commit themselves to music.
So at the end of the day, you're very diversified in your approach to what you do in the world of jazz. But what do you look forward to the most? What gets you up every day? What motivates you? What do you look forward to the most being a professional musician?
I think that there's a lot of opportunities. Like I mean, it doesn't feel like that right now for a lot of people, but I think there are so many different things that I could do. And I've set my career up in this way too. So many different things that I could do. I could decide to write an album of original music. I could decide that I just want to go and do 10 Bud Powell transcriptions. I could decide I want to start this business. I could, and I love that kind of freedom around it, to be able to give myself permission to go down into a wormhole, or down into a concept, and like really stay there for a while, that there's nobody that's policing what I'm doing, that I can really like get up and say to myself, this is the thing I'm really interested in. I'm going to spend some time here. And so I think for me, that's the most exciting thing about it.
And at the end of the day, this show is about the jazz idiom. This is something you've dedicated your life to. So very simply put, why do you love jazz?
I love jazz. I think from like the same thing I described about hearing Oscar Peterson, the fact that there's a freedom associated with it, that you can express yourself, that you can go in a lot of different directions, that you could hear five people play the same song and hear it played five different ways or 10 different ways, like it's always interesting. But the fact that there is a structure to it and that there's a history to it and a lineage to it and there are laws in some ways governing it for how harmony works and how we think about it. And so it's sort of the freedom in it, but also that there are skills to master and it's not just chaos. That for me is really, really intriguing.
So, what was the first live jazz show you saw that blew you away?
Oh, what was it? I mean, we would go, my high school jazz band would go to the Music Fest Nationals every year.
Yeah.
And, you would see groups from all across the country and even some American groups, depending on where there were. And I remember going to the Nationals in Halifax, and God, I don't even know what year this is, 1992 or something. And I was in high school, and we heard these groups from Berkeley. And I just couldn't believe that people could play that well. And these were like Berkeley students.
Yeah.
It's not like an Ella Fitzgerald story or something, but
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe that people could play like that. And I would say those were some of the most exciting times that I remember having in music is like just I just couldn't believe that people could play like that. And I thought if I could ever play like that, that would be amazing.
If the Berklee College of Music is ever looking for an advertisement, you just gave it
Right.
to them,
I know,
right?
but I didn't go there, so it
Right.
wouldn't.
There you go. So there you go. It kind of twists the narrative.
Exactly.
So let me ask you this. If you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see one performance in their prime, where are you going?
Oh, wow, that's a tough question. I would have to go see Carmen McRae somewhere. Like
Okay.
there's this album that's out of print now called Carmen McRae Live at Ronnie Scott's.
Yeah.
And she was in her absolute prime. Absolute prime. I don't know when the record was. I'd have to look for it. I have it on CD. And I would be in the audience for that show.
Yeah.
She was absolutely on point, like in her element, in her confidence, in her womanhood. Like she was just it I would love to have gone and seen that show. That would have been amazing.
Think sometimes, and I'm not a musician, but I would think sometimes when musicians know they're getting recorded, there would be a level of anticipation and anxiety that would be a lot different. I know Sonny Rollins always talked about he just didn't like the studio. He would rather do it improv in person. That's the nature of this art form. But
Yeah.
I would wonder with some of them, like with Carmen, if they turned it on, that light switch went up in a way that was totally different and they didn't care if it was being recorded or what was going on. They just went into it knowing that they had to be on.
I wonder, and I mean, it's also a different thing. Like being a woman in this industry, especially in her era, was it. I mean, even in my earlier days, now it's very different because there's a lot more women around. But she really had to be in a very strong place of power in order for her to be able to do it at all.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if maybe she was in that place of like power or of have almost like sort of put the walls up to a level where she just could be invincible in these kinds of situations just because of the nature of what she must have had to face.
Yeah. See, I would love to see Ella come out on that stage the first time at the Apollo when she was a kid and
Oh
just blow
yeah.
that room away. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
because I've heard stories that when she was off stage, it was very strange. She just was not a socially adept, that just wasn't her gig. But when she got on stage, she flowered into this kind of peacock kind of incarnation and turned into something magical. And to see that for the first time, because that's the toughest room in show business. If you go out on the Apollo and make it, you made it.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
for her to be up there and to do what she did is crazy.
Yeah, yeah. And there's so many examples of that. But then I wonder if because we've been in this era of like American Idol and all
Yeah.
those kinds of shows, if maybe it would hit different
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we see that kind of thing is sort of all the time. I wonder if it would have looked much different
Yeah.
than we see it on those talent shows. Like,
Uh-huh.
if only they could have, videoed that, it would have been really
Oh,
interesting.
yeah, it would have been totally cool. So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh, that's just an easy small question.
That's that this is we have entered therapy hour.
Well, I mean, I'm a lot of things. I have a lot of compartments. I compartmentalize my life a lot. And so at first I really think of myself as a musician first. It's a huge part of my identity. It's a huge part of how I go through my day and the world is as a creative person and as a person that is thinking about music most of the time in some facet or the other. Somehow I've also become this entrepreneur, which, like what? you know, what? And, like I have a YouTube channel with more than 20,000 subscribers. And that's part of who I am now, too, like thinking of marketing and thinking of business plans and things like that. And then this other compartment of me is a mom, and that my waking hours are spent worrying about my kid at school and thinking about what are we going to do and thinking about the future and the near future and the far, and then, that's kind of the compartments of me, and the way that I think about how I'm kind of made, or all of those things sort of put together at one time. I think at the end it's kind of all the same, because you're sort of moving the needle through my life, like kicking the can down the road a little bit,
Yeah.
and these things swirling around in all of them. So,
Yeah, for sure. And you can't take one or two things out. It seems as though all of it comes together to make the whole, to make you kind of exercise the right. I mean, because being an entrepreneur is a level of left brain, and you're obviously very much so in a right brain profession. So you
mhm.
get to use the whole hemisphere.
Yeah, I do. And, in the midst of all of that, I have a sense of humor that is constantly going. There's like the sense of humor part of it. And you can hear this on this record. The album is pretty serious in some ways, but there is humor throughout.
Yeah.
There's a few definitely laugh out loud kind of moments in it. So that's kind of the way I look at it, is I think we're sort of living this bizarre science experiment most of the time, going like, what?
Yeah.
What's happening now?
Uh-huh.
But also very, very dedicated and devoted to, doing the best that I can to leave some kind of mark. And if that is in a musical way, that people are inspired by that, or as a teacher, for people to feel like they got to express themselves in a way they couldn't before, or in putting this young man into the world to do something positive, or at least not be a total jerk. I guess those are the things that I would like to have had my life stand for.
So Motherhood is the new album. If anyone wants to get it in earnest in the proper way, other than streaming or catch you live, any of the good business, where do they go?
They can go to my website, brendaearle.com. Earle has an E at the end of it. I also have the album can be bought on Bandcamp. That's a great place to do it, as you say, so we can make more than $0.
Yeah, right.
And you can sign up for my mailing list on my website.
I love it. Brenda, thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.